Embiid is having an MVP caliber season, and what scares me is that James Harden's going to take away from that. Alright everybody, welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. It's your boy Dom, and we're going to get right into things here today. So, today, we're talking about James Harden. More specifically, we're going to talk about his new fit with his new team, the Philadelphia 76ers, but we'll get into that in a minute. Really, I kind of want to recap to how we got to this point. So, obviously, last year we saw him get traded from the Houston Rockets. James Harden was drafted to the OKC Thunder with the 3rd overall pick, was eventually traded after being a 6-man and them not wanting to extend him, and he ended up on the Houston Rockets, right? I believe Jeremy Lamb was in that trade, but at the end of the day, when you look back on it, the Rockets won that trade by a crazy amount, and clearly OKC probably should have chosen James Harden over Serge Ibaka. Now we'll never know how that would turn out. That's a what if for another day. But what ended up happening is he goes to the Rockets. He wins multiple MVPs. He is, potentially a couple injuries away from making the finals against that monster of a Warriors team with Kevin Durant and Stephen Curry on it. But things end up fizzling out with every star that you see him play with. You see him play with Dwight. Dwight doesn't like playing with him. You see him play with Chris Paul, one of his longtime friends, doesn't like playing with him. You see him play with Russell Westbrook, doesn't like him playing with him, and they have to reshape their whole roster, and then eventually James Harden just gets sick of it. So obviously there was all the fat suit drama and everything like that, and what ends up happening is he is traded in a 4-team deal to end up on the Nets, where we saw the Nets trade 4 unprotected first-round picks and 4 first-round pick swaps that were also unprotected, giving the Rockets the rights to their 2021 pick, their 2022 pick, the rights to their 2023 pick, their 2024 pick, the rights to their 2025 pick, their 2026 pick, the rights to their 2027 pick, and also Milwaukee's 2022 pick as well. So, and then that's the same deal where we saw the Rockets get Victor Oladipo, Rodion Krug, and Dante Exum, and they had traded Karis LeVert and Jared Allen in order to acquire Victor Oladipo, where we saw Karis LeVert end up on the Pacers, and now obviously be traded again to the Cleveland Cavaliers, which is funnily enough because now he pairs up with Jared Allen, who was also sent to the Cavaliers in this trade as well, where we also saw Taurean Prince go to the Cavs, who was later traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves in the deal that brought Ricky Rubio, the guy that was able to be traded for Karis LeVert, to the Cavaliers. So this trade had a lot of implications across the whole league. It set the Rockets directly into full rebuild, and obviously the Nets got James Harden and it gave them the big 3, but the question was, will the offense work? The Pacers got another play that we thought was going to be able to do very well for them. He ends up getting traded later because at the end of the day, most of their players were just kind of very decent NBA players, like guys that can get you 20-point role players is how I would describe them. Like Miles Turner can get you 20 points, but he's a role player. Karis LeVert can get you 20 points, but he's a role player. Malcolm Brogdon can get you 20 points, but he's a role player. Even Sabonis is a low-tier star, in my opinion. So, the Pacers had to end up blow things up this year, but that's for another video for another day. And then obviously the Cavaliers now with Jared Allen, with Ricky Rubio's mentorship, and now Karis LeVert, and then Darius Garland and everything that they got going on there with Evan Mobley, they're now in the playoffs, and so we saw a lot happen across the league from this trade. But what, I think at the time we didn't realize was, the question was it going to work on the court for the Nets? And I don't think anybody could foresee, New York's laws surrounding, vaccination status and everything like that, that brought about, Kyrie Irving not being able to play games and stuff like that there. But the off the court stuff is really what tore down this team. And so, over this, last playoffs, we saw, injuries to James Harden. An Iron Man, in Houston, he was finally getting injured. Was it all the time on his body? Was it the new team? Was it whatever? But was it, him not taking the game serious and going to strip clubs or whatever it was? We saw injuries start to finally pop up in James Harden's career. For a guy that hadn't been injured for, the majority of his career, he's always there. And then we saw Kyrie Irving, a guy who's injury prone. He again suffered from injuries in this last playoff. So, if Kevin Durant's shoe size was maybe half down, they maybe make the NBA Finals potentially. But, regardless, injuries were the downfall of the team last year. And so coming into this year, it was like, okay, yeah, you might have injuries. Make sure you have the depth around them. And we've seen, at the start of the year, they were playing all these random guys. Now, it looks like they have some, maybe diamonds in the rough. They were able to bring in a solid backup point guard in Patty Mills, who's been able to kind of help when Kyrie Irving hasn't been playing. And the team hasn't been sitting atop of the East. Now, to start the year, they were, and then, they were, again, plagued with injuries, and Kevin Durant was having to play 48 minutes a game for like 2 weeks. And he was keeping them afloat, but eventually, now they've kind of sunk in the standings a little bit. Now, I believe at this point in the standings, they are like 6th or 8th in the standings. Let me double check that real quick. But things quickly went downwards from where they were. And currently, yeah, they are the 8th seed at 31-28. Right now, it's obviously the All-Star break and everything like that, but they've had quite a fall from grace. Kevin Durant was a leader for MVP, and it looked like, everything was going well, but the off-the-court stuff wasn't working, right? What we didn't know is that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant were growing frustrated with James Harden. Now, there was, the Nets GM had reportedly gone to Kevin Durant and been like, hey, can we trade him, James Harden for Ben Simmons over the summer? And he said no. And I think it's telling of how much things kind of started to go wrong for the fact that Kevin Durant obviously said yes to the trade, right? Because if you're the Nets, you're not doing anything without Kevin Durant's consent, because he's under contract for like the next 4 years. He is the only guy that's truly fully committed to your franchise. And so if that guy doesn't sign off on it and you do something, you just shot yourself in the foot, right? So the fact that, Kevin Durant clearly said yes to the trade, and then we kind of saw the repercussions of how he felt about it when we saw him and LeBron James drafting for the All-Star game, right? We saw how he just refused to take James Harden at that point, and it was almost like LeBron knew he wasn't going to take James Harden, so he was able to wait to get a good player until the end of the draft. Now James Harden isn't playing, and that's where Jared Allen was able to get his replacement for the All-Star game, which is still an All-Star, so don't take that away. In 20 years all you're going to see is All-Star in his resume, so what does that tell you? But yeah, we saw, kind of truly how, things kind of broke down at that point. He kept his composure, I think, being on live television and everything like that. But, I guess to this next trade, we saw James Harden get traded again. Something I don't think anybody ever could have fathomed. I think maybe we could have seen James Harden walking in free agency from the Nets, but for him to be traded from the Nets, I don't think anybody ever saw that. And it almost feels like it was Daryl Morey's plan all along, right? It almost feels like every time since Daryl Morey got there that we heard Ben Simmons trade rumors, that it was all smoke and mirrors to just stir up stuff until eventually Harden could get there. And Daryl Morey got his wishes. Daryl Morey got, the guy that he wanted, and it's interesting because in the trade we saw, I think, the Sixers give up at least one other very valuable player other than Ben Simmons. I think that they'll grow to regret, kind of like every team I think in the last 5 years that's got rid of him has, and this is a guy that he's kind of journeyed around the league, but I think ever since we really saw him in Portland with Dame and CJ, Seth Curry is kind of really rose onto the scene, not to the point obviously of his brother of being unanimous MVP or anything like that, but he's become one of the best shooters in the league, especially spot up and stuff like that, and percentage wise. He's just a knockdown guy, and I think ever since leaving Portland and going back to the Mavs and then being traded from there, I think the Sixers will kind of join that group of teams that is going to regret losing this guy because of what he adds in the modern NBA. And you might not see that at face value because, yeah, he might be a bit of a defensive liability and stuff like that, but the fact that he has that type of spacing and stuff, it's something you don't see in a lot of guys. And so the Brooklyn Nets received Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, 2 first-round picks out of the 8 that they got rid of. And then the Sixers received a one James Harden. And, yeah, so... Oh, and Paul Millsap as well. I forgot Paul Millsap was in that trade. Shout out Paul Millsap. But yeah, it's interesting because there's 2 sides to this trade, right? Obviously, like there is to every trade. That was kind of a dumb thing to say. But when you look at it from the Nets' perspective, things weren't working out, and I think Ben Simmons fits with your team a little bit better. Now, I can't give this an A because hopefully Ben Simmons has been working on his game, but we don't know exactly when he's going to come back. I think he wants to be back by the time they play the Sixers for the first time. And I believe, I think what some people don't understand when you're saying like, oh, his mental health issues weren't real. I think they did become real. Maybe initially they weren't and he was just frustrated, but I think from the constant harassment throughout the internet, where this guy was probably for eight or 9 months tagged in every single little mistake that he did, so he saw it. This isn't some 40-year-old guy. This is a guy that's on the internet every single day. This is a guy that's dating Kardashians. Like, this guy is on his phone. He sees this stuff, and I'm sure over time, with the relentless not only attack from the media, but just attack from the fans, and discrediting of what he has done, I'm sure it did affect him. I'm sure that this was a guy that was down, and he was like, that's probably, when we saw him go back to the Sixers, he's like, maybe I'll just try and make this work, right? And obviously he'd been losing a lot of money at that point. But for him, money will come, right? He's a good enough player that even if he never gets a jump shot, money will come to him because of his defensive ability, because of his playmaking ability, because of his size, right? He's not going to have to worry about money, I don't think. Well, he is an NBA caliber player. Now, if he's smart with his money or not, that could be different afterwards, but well, he's in the NBA, he's not going to have to worry about money, and he'll be in the NBA for a long time, right? But I do think it could have gotten to him. And so a change of scenery, like, it's kind of like if you're at like a job, right? Or if you're with a girl. If you're at a job and all of your managers are just douches, right? And you go to a new job, you don't know anybody, so it's a fresh start with everybody. Everybody's probably pretty nice to you at the start. Yeah, there's probably going to be that one or two people that are just kind of douches in your mind. But shoot, probably one of them you'll end up liking in the long run, and the other one you'll probably still think is a douche. But majority wise, you're gonna feel better initially going to that new job. Or if you're with a girl and it's a toxic relationship or whatever, and she just makes things difficult every single day of the week, right? Constantly complaining to her or whatever, and you leave her, yeah, once you get over her, you're gonna be happier. And then once you find the next girl, you're gonna be back in that honeymoon phase where things are good, right? So I think we will see the honeymoon phase, obviously, with the Nets and everything like that. I think Ben Simmons is going to be very happy playing there. I think we've already seen Andre Drummond and Seth Curry make an immediate impact. The rebounding that Drummond has brought to this team is something the team didn't have. Now, I don't expect Andre Drummond to even be a starting center for them come playoff time or anything like that. But the fact that, he's kind of like the DeMarcus Cousins signing for my Denver Nuggets. It's a guy that can go get you. Now, Andre Drummond kind of flipped the stats. He's more of like an 8 points and like 14 rebounds guy, whereas DeMarcus Cousins is kind of a 14 points and 8 rebounds type of guy. But if that's your backup center and he can just provide some size for you and consistent help on the interior, and you're not expecting him to be a star or putting all that on him, that can be very beneficial for your basketball team, because it's just somebody that the other team's not going to plan for. And even if they do, you're not stopping Andre Drummond from getting a rebound. This guy was built for it. He was born to rebound the basketball. Seth Curry and Steph Curry, and any Curry really, was born to shoot the three, right? So both those guys are still going to provide that. And once Ben Simmons comes to this team, it brings a guy that you can play at that small ball five. I think you use him in a facet that you were using Blake Griffin. I think you move him to that power forward center position where you play him at small ball five in like some of a Warriors death lineup type of thing, where you can, put Seth Curry out there. You can put, I think Joe Harris is done for the year, but you can put, who is their wing defender that they have out there? It is, I cannot think of his name. He's been pretty decent for them though. He's not a guy that maybe you're thinking of the top of your head. I mean, yeah, you have Bruce Brown, but I'm thinking of Kessler Edwards, right? You can put a guy like Kessler Edwards out there. You can put obviously, a Cam Thomas if you want some more shooting, Bruce Brown if you want that smaller, more gritty defender. But you kind of have options there. Then you obviously have Kevin Durant and either a Kyrie Irving or a Patty Mills, and that's a very strong lineup, especially if you're having Ben Simmons be kind of your point center, pushing the ball up the court, where you kind of have spacers on the outside. That's going to create so much offense for Ben Simmons, because it's not going to be the same situation as it was in Philadelphia. It's not going to be, and yeah, you're not going to play him at center the whole game. Most of the time, you're going to have another big out there, and you'll have to work things around that. But for stretches throughout the game, I mean, LaMarcus is a mid-range dead-eye shooter, right? So you don't have to play him directly in the post. You can play him in that short mid-range area, which just creates a little bit more space. And sometimes that little bit more space is all you need to have one of the best offenses in the NBA. So we'll see how that translates. I think Ben Simmons helps this team tremendously on the defense. I think there's potential to help teams tremendously on the offensive end. And I believe Steve Nash, as a coach, should be able to tap into that. but we'll have to wait and kind of see on that. As for the 76ers perspective of this, kind of the main part of the video that we're now just getting into at 15 minutes in pretty much, James Harden. It's James Harden. I mean, I don't think you're getting Rockets James Harden. I don't think you're getting 36 points per game, and I don't think you want 36 points per game for James Harden because of what Embiid is doing. Embiid is having an MVP caliber season, and what scares me is that James Harden's going to take away from that. I think as a Jokic fan, I'd love to see him win it. He's not a high enough seed. So yeah, if Embiid can go get it and, you know, rebring that conversation back, I'm always going to be with Jokic on that conversation. I used to be with Embiid before kind of Jokic really took off. And that's just because, you know, Embiid had that defensive ability, and now Jokic has kind of gotten to be a good defender rather than a negative on the defensive end. So, you know, Jokic's improvement has really brought him over in my end. But when you're looking at that Embiid thing, like, if he can kind of make that a conversation again, why not? Why not have an MVP? Why not go to the playoffs? And I still think you run Embiid as your number one option. Now, closing time, you're not going to close through a big. So that's where you have James Harden for. You have, I think you almost run it as Embiid as your LeBron James and James Harden as your Kyrie Irving type of thing. Now, those aren't exact comps if you kind of get where I'm going with it, though. I think, you know, Embiid is still the face of your franchise, and if James Harden can be what he was with the Rockets, that's amazing. He's probably a better player than Embiid then. And if that guy's your number two, that's really good. And I think the fact that James Harden showed a willingness to be the number two in Brooklyn. Now, also some of that was Kyrie was like, here, yeah, you be the number two, you be the point guard, you're good at that, you can pass, right? So if James Harden is using his passing, if the Philadelphia 76ers, I think you have to run Matisse Thybulle out there in the starting lineup with him, because James Harden, he takes possessions off. He doesn't hustle on the defensive end. And I could see that creating some issues in the locker room, because the Philadelphia 76ers are a gritty team. They're a gritty defensive team, a gritty, even offensive team, where they're just going to take the hard buckets. They're going to take the easy layups. They're going to fight for that stuff. And James Harden's that flashy guy with his step backs and his layups and everything like that. Now, I don't expect him to be a locker room issue, but I could see a little bit of growing pains initially with this team because of some of the way the differences in styles of, you know, James Harden being that flashy player that I just said, and this Philadelphia 76ers team being such a grit-oriented team. Whereas, you know, with the Nets, it was kind of more of that flashy style. You know, you've got Kevin Durant, one of the greatest scorers of all time. You've got Kyrie Irving, one of, if not the greatest handler of all time. And so James Harden fits right in play-wise, personality-wise. Now, obviously, we saw those off-the-court issues arise and everything like that. But I do think you still treat Embiid as your number one. You still cater to Embiid, and you still put him at the forefront of your franchise. And so that's interesting, because I think a lot of people are overlooking play style here. And James Harden is a very... He kind of plays like 2K, where he throws a screener at the top, and he does what he needs to get his open shot, right? He's a shot creator in 2K. Is exactly how I would describe James Harden almost. He's exactly what you hope to be as a shot creator in 2K. And then there's Joel Embiid. He's not just your Clint Capella that's just going to sit there with his screen. He's your all-around big. He can rebound, defend, score, shoot. I mean, all the above, this guy is able to do it. And so, because of that difference in play styles, Joel Embiid's just not going to sit at the top of the key holding a pick, waiting for James Harden to reject it or take it, or reject it or take it, and roll and all this stuff just so James Harden can, you know, throw a lob. Embiid's not going to catch a ton of lobs. Embiid's going to catch it and then go up with it, right? That's more of Embiid's style. So, do expect some growing pains here. Do expect this team to be good, but it might take, you know, 5 to 9 games or so before this team kind of gets some chemistry really shaken. And in that time, I think you could see, you know, a frustrated Embiid go to the bench because of the way James Harden is playing, or vice versa. James Harden might go to the bench and be like, I'm not getting to do what I want to do, right? Because of the difference. Now, I think that's with every trade, you will see that, and I think that's something you have to expect. And I think this team will be good. I think both teams, the Nets and the Sixers, have the opportunity that, yes, if they play their very best, if the stars align, if everything works out, if the mandate for the vaccination to be able to play in New York goes away, if James Harden and Joel Embiid just mesh properly on the court and off the court, I think off the court they'll mesh fine. They seem very similar off the court. James Harden with his strip club, Embiid with his trolling. It adds up off the court. It's on the court. How is that going to work? So wait for that to see. Can Doc Rivers get the most out of it? I think viewpoint on Doc Rivers has changed over the years. You know, coming off the Celtics, he was looked at as one of the best coaches in the NBA. With the Lob City Clippers, was looked at one of the best coaches in the NBA. But then when the Clippers started to fail, stuff kind of went downwards. But then when they elected to move on from him, he was still looked at as a very good coach. But the fact that he went to Philadelphia and everything kind of went awry, and the whole Ben Simmons situation, I think, you know, the viewpoint on him as a not only great, but almost at this point competent head coach has kind of become to be in question. So we'll see if truly what Doc Rivers coaching wise is on how he handles the situation of having these two all-time great players, you know, the next Hakeem and, you know, a top 5 shooting guard of all time on his team. How does he manage that? How does he make it work? And if they win a championship, I think, you know, his resume and his view, and, you know, fans and media's viewpoint on him as a coach is restored to what it was, if not even better than what it was after he was coming off the Celtics. But if it isn't, I think, you know, it becomes into question. He's looked at as maybe not one of those all-time coaches that maybe he could be. And then as for the Nets, I think, you know, Steve Nash has gotten a player that puts him in the perfect position because of his playmaking ability and because of how Steve Nash can kind of relate to that as, you know, as a former player coach, that he should be able to kind of tap into that and run, I mean, 7 seconds or less offense with this Brooklyn Nets team would work fantastically if you're running it properly and you have proper spacing and everything like that. You're running a point center, a little bit of a different, more modern version of it. Could work phenomenally with this roster. Now you do have some older stars like Kevin Durant, so you have to see how that's going to work. But I do think it provides itself opportunity in those crunch time situations where you're running Simmons at the 5 or whatever to do some of that stuff that Steve Nash is very, very familiar with and very understanding of, because, you know, he executed it so well for the Phoenix Suns so often not that long ago, right? So I think both these teams have the opportunity to win the championship at this point. I would bet ceiling wise, though, we're probably just going to see them maybe conference finals teams. I think that would be an amazing series if we can get a Philadelphia 76ers versus Brooklyn Nets series. Sign me up for 7 games of that and a thrilling overtime. I want to see every minute of action of that type of series that we could. I think it would be a gritty, hard fought series. And I guess at this point my pick would probably be Philadelphia. I think my pick would be on the team that's going to have 2 of the top 3 best players in the series. I think Kevin Durant's the best out of any player on the court in that series, but having Embiid and Harden out there as well, I think helps win you it, because you have 2 and 3 and a lot of time in a series. If I'm looking at the top 4 players and one team has 1 and 4 and the other team has 2 and 3, unless one is LeBron, I'm typically going to pick 2 and 3. I think that would be a super fun series to see in the playoffs. Right now, if we were looking to try and see that in the playoffs, let me look at the standings one more time. So Philly's the 3 seed, Brooklyn is the 8 seed. So if Brooklyn beats the 1 seed, it wouldn't be until the conference finals right now. Now we could see Philadelphia drop to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who they have a tied record with. Milwaukee's climbing right up on them as well. And we're seeing Boston kind of rise up in the playoffs as well. And then I think Brooklyn will have a late push, especially once they get Simmons in, because he's going to help their regular season a lot. I think with that playmaking and defensive ability, he's going to help on both ends of the floor, even if he isn't shooting, where shooting becomes a little bit more of an issue is the playoffs. So expect once he's out there, them to really start winning games. I'd expect him to be a smoother and quicker fit, especially because he's going to have all this time before he starts playing off the court and in practice to kind of get that chemistry flowing before he even touches the court, whereas James Harden's going to be thrust in the fire a little bit more. Now I know, you know, obviously he's a little bit hurt right now, and that's why Jared Allen is playing in the All-Star game instead of him, but we could see this team match up, you know, with just a little bit of seeding change. I mean, if Brooklyn moves up 2 seeds and takes Boston's spot, that's a first round matchup, and I don't want to see it in the first round. I would love to see it actually in the second round, I think. I want to see Milwaukee in the conference finals as well. But yeah, I think both these teams have an opportunity to come out of the East, and I'd be super interested to see how that would work. So let me know what you guys think about the James Harden trade. I know I'm a few days late on it, but that's why I was super in depth with it, going over the trades and kind of how that just affected the landscape of the NBA itself. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace out, guys.